Well, President Donald Trump wants a peace agreement with Iran signed today, which happens to be his 80th birthday, posting that, quote, immediately after it's signed, the Hormuz Strait will be open to all.
But Tehran is giving a different timeline, saying a deal will not be signed today, but leaving open the possibility that it could come over the next several days. Of course, all this comes as G7 leaders head to the French Alps for the annual summit, where Iran is set to be a dominant topic, along with tariffs and Ukraine and European security, as the European sector deals with inflationary pressures and shaken oil markets from the war in the Middle East. We're going to go to Abeer first. Abeer, look, we're hearing different things from different folks on this timeline, and I'm wondering what you are hearing from the Iranians, from the Middle East. I've heard that folks from other regional allies are heading to Europe to try to help facilitate this. But you've got the president very vehemently tweeting, this is happening today, and messaging from Tehran saying, not so fast. Where is the truth, and do we know?
Yeah, Christina, look, I mean, we headed into the weekend with some positive sort of sentiment, thinking this is actually a different time around, that this is going to be signed. What we're hearing right now is going back to this conflicting statement. So the latest comes from a Reuters report that suggests that Iran, the MOU that Iran is looking at right now, suggests diluting the highly enriched uranium within Iran in exchange for $25 billion of frozen assets. Now, we haven't heard from the American side of things. Reuters does cite a source familiar with the Iranian negotiating team, but we still have to hear. But look, I mean, even this report, those two elements, the highly enriched uranium to be destroyed or diluted within Iran, and then $25 billion of assets, those are things that President Trump has not agreed to. When it comes to the highly enriched uranium, he said he wanted it to be destroyed, whether in Iran or somewhere abroad in the United States. And Iran hawks in Washington and President Trump have not agreed to let go of those frozen assets after the 1979 revolution that have been kept in the United States and other places around the world. So we're still getting conflicting messaging. I know our colleagues are in Geneva and other places as well to sort of be able to report on the American side. But from the Gulf, for example, what we're getting is we know that a Qatari team went to Tehran today to be able to sort of mend those differences. Qatar has emerged as a key player in the mediation over the past couple of weeks or so. We also reported on that alongside Pakistan. And so we're still in wait and see. We thought that by now, by Sunday, we're going to be getting a little bit more clarity on Iran coming to the table and actually this MOU getting signed. The Pakistani Prime Minister yesterday said that it would be signed electronically within 24 hours, but we're edging more and more towards it might actually be delayed. And the Strait of Hormuz still effectively shut. President Trump says that it will be opened as soon as the deal is signed. But then we're also not forgetting about the fact that Iran has mined the Strait of Hormuz and maintains that it wants a management over it once the strait is open. So still, the concessions are not being met by both sides.
Let's go to the shores of Lake Geneva now to Josh Wingrove, who is missing out on the president's birthday celebrations in the UFC fight in the Claw. Forgive me, we may have lost Josh. Hugo, still on the shores of Lake Geneva. Hugo, great to speak with you. And maybe you can set the scene for us there in Geneva, in the Alps broadly, as we look to the start of this G7. Yes, there are a host of economic issues and trade issues likely to be discussed by all the participants in that gathering this year. How large does the conflict in Iran, loom over the course of what they're going to be speaking about there? And what meetings does President Trump have planned on the sidelines here with other non-G7 leaders?
Well, right up until yesterday, there was speculation that a deal was at hand, and there would even be a signing ceremony here in Geneva, hastily convened. And in fact, I flew in from some reporting yesterday morning to Geneva Airport, and there were four sort of twin rotor helicopters, U.S. Army helicopters, plus a massive transport plane that was really kind of setting the scene for a very large presence. Obviously, President Trump has not yet arrived. And I think the very fact, as we were just hearing, that there is a very much on or off deal means that it's very, very hard to predict what's going on. But obviously, as you say, the peace talks and finding a solution has dominated what would otherwise be, a G7 meeting about global cooperation. Because in addition to whatever the US and Iran managed to negotiate, we have President Macron convening leaders from the Gulf region here as well. So it's very much not a kind of G7 business as usual type of event this year.
Hugo, I've seen some comparisons. The last time this G7 met in Evian in France, it was June 2003. The U.S. had just invaded Iraq over the strident objections of France and Germany, and President Bush was the one rolling into some chilly handshakes. I mean, this is not a friendly environment. Obviously, these leaders need the United States. They're going to put on their friendliest face to try to convince the president to maintain America's stake in European security. But we've got a lot of messaging from the White House. We've got announcements and then unannouncements and re-announcements of NATO troops being pulled back. We've got this messaging that they're going to possibly take some of the jets out of the region, which would impact readiness and ability to respond to conflicts when they do occur. How are leaders approaching this? Is there a united front among these leaders on how to approach this? And then what do you think the odds are of convincing, the original NATO idea, the original Secretary General said it was to keep Germany down, Russia out, and the U.S. in. How is that going?
Well, we know that the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's kind of approach of buttering up the U.S. president was thought initially to be a successful strategy. And then clearly, one by one, U.S. leaders have been willing to say, no, we are simply not going to do that. Started with Keir Starmer, and then you've seen President Merz Premier Merz in Germany do the same thing. So it feels like that approach where we're going to just go along with whatever Donald Trump says in order to keep him on side. That kind of unified front has been sort of undone, picked apart, because they just realized that even sometimes doing that doesn't guarantee you the results. You just mentioned, the major plans this week to pull U.S. Fighter jets out of Europe. So Mark Rutte's sycophantic approach, dare I say?
Maybe appeasement, one of those, yeah.
One of those words, the A word, it has not worked. And so I think you're going to see a rather, obviously we're not going to be right in that room, but you're going to see a less than united front. And so it'll be the mood music, and it will be whether they can manage to achieve any kind of agreement on a communique coming out of the meeting that will clearly be parsed very closely by those looking for signs that friendly coalition or a sort of mutual willingness to work together has really fallen apart definitively.
Abeer, here in the U.S., the president's distaste for the JCPOA is pretty evident, pretty palpable, and he tweeted about that yesterday, that this deal is not that. That was a smooth, beautiful road to a nuclear weapon, to paraphrase him. His deal, whatever that may be, is not. I'm curious how large the historical resonance is at this moment, how much leaders throughout the Middle East are talking about getting back to something like the JCPOA. Is it something that they're trying to avoid as assiduously as President Trump is?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the current deal or the MOU, the 14 provisions that were leaked by semi-official media in Iran yesterday suggests that a lot of the concessions that are on the table may actually be worse off. So a lot of it plays into Iran's favor. So the two things that President Trump wants to get through the line is for Iran to never be able to get a hold of a nuclear weapon. But the thing is, Iran has always maintained that it wasn't going to get a nuclear weapon. I know a lot of people talk about the fatwa that was issued during the late supreme leader's time, but that is, we don't know if that fatwa dies with him, and that is sort of an Islamic way of getting things done in Iran. But we don't know if that fatwa dies with him or if it is still pretty much the case. Now, there's a body of 88 clerks that kind of comes up with those fatwas, and we haven't heard since his death if that changes. So for the time being, what we know is that Iran is still not going to get a nuclear weapon, or is not seeking to get a nuclear weapon. And then the other thing that the U.S. would win out of this is the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. And arguably, the Strait of Hormuz was pretty open for business before this whole thing started late in February. The other concessions, our own teams and then wider analysts say that they all play into Iran's favor. So the unblocking of the 25 or 24 $1.4 billion of frozen assets, removing the oil sanctions, the rebuilding of Iran. Again, that leaked statement suggested that Iran was asking for about $300 billion in damages to rebuild the country economically. So a lot of the consensus here is, well, how does this deal leave us better than what happened under President Obama, the GCPOA? And then the main thing that President Trump wanted to change was a regime change. Now, he said that we're dealing with a different regime in Iran, but ultimately it is still, the son of the late supreme leader that is making the ultimate decisions here. So the consensus is still about whether this is actually better off than what we had a few years ago under President Obama or not. We just don't know yet what concessions are going to be met, so we'll have to wait and see again.
And Hugo, that's a question that some European leaders have voiced pretty openly, including Merz of Germany, who said that essentially Trump was being played by Iranian negotiators earlier in this process. Those comments are still kind of hanging over this summit. I want you to run us through who the president is meeting with and who he's not meeting with, because he's having bilats with some of these leaders, but he's not having bilats or even meetings on the sides of the G7 with some pretty significant figures, including Benjamin Netanyahu and Zelensky. They're having like a working group, but they're not having a one-on-one.
Yeah, no, I think it's the final agenda, but I think it's still very fluid because everything will be overshadowed by a deal or the failure to get a deal. And that, I think, is something he really wants to be able to bring. So if he's got a deal, he's going to want to trumpet that. And I can imagine that some of those bilaterals are going to be set aside. But yeah, clearly he does not take well to being criticized by the likes of by Merz. And I don't know the latest if he was supposed to have a bilateral with him, but I think those kind of comments about President Trump getting played are likely to see him snub. And obviously, as the leader of the most powerful economy and military in the world, he has that prerogative, and we've seen him do it in the past. So it's going to be very interesting. The compressed timing that he has, focused so much on getting a deal across the line, means that really I think his focus and then those of his advisors is almost only going to shift onto the conventional G7 schedule and those bilateral meetings compared to the Iran focus.
Christina, we were talking about the sycophancy with Mark Rutte. The president is going to go to Versailles, I gather, at the end of this for a one-on-one with President Macron as well. So there is, I guess that's not a formal bilat at the summit, but something happening on the heels of this as well. Also,
this plays into what these leaders have found to be effective with President Trump. A lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of gilded moldings,
yes,
a nice ceremony, and then maybe convincing him of what they want. Abeer, I also want to ask you, there is news that the former supreme leader of Iran is likely to be buried. I think in the next week they're going to have a funeral service for him. Where has that body been this whole time? Do we know? And is it significant that it's a bit back to business as usual, that the Iranian regime, whatever that may be at this point, feels comfortable holding that kind of a ceremony?
Yeah, I was reading that over yesterday, and that the burial is going to take place later or over next week. So we don't know where the body has been held. The Iranian regime keeps those details pretty secretive, just like the location of the current supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, has been a secret since the outbreak of this war late in February. And so, look, we don't know the details. We know that previously burials or funerals held for such leaders have brought in millions of people. We don't know how that's going to take shape under the current circumstances in Iran. But yeah, that is essentially what the Iranian regime had said, what it had suggested, that it will just happen next week at some point. Not further details, I'm afraid, Christina.
Abeer, thank you very much. Thanks to Hugo as well. We'll find Josh Wingrove.